Delver, a simple dungeon crawling roguelike created by Cuddigan and Joshua Skelton of Priority Interrupt that showcases a beautiful 16-bit inspired 3D art style and music that evokes a warm nostalgia. It was initially released on PC for free as an alpha build on the 1st of March 2012, and a port to Android mobile devices was created and made playable on the 24th of that same month. The game wasn't always like this, however. You see, the alpha is a very different game to how it is today. Today it's an extremely vibrant, complex and beautiful game with deeper mechanics and a more advanced AI. Despite this though, the core feel and mechanics of the alpha can be found and felt even still in the latest release. For the first 8.5 months of its life, it was free, but shifted to a paid alpha on the 18th of November 2012. From this point onwards up until the 23rd of October 2013, the game retained this very simple look, and it was in this state when I first came in contact with the game in early 2013 on the Google Play Store. I was in my first year of high school at the time, and I played it every day on the bus, on the way there and on the way back, for quite some time. I would do 1 or 2 floors on each trip, hoping to get further and further each time, and because of this, the game's alpha holds a dear nostalgic place in my heart, and I get this immense feeling of warmth and happiness when I play it. Luckily, if you're like me and you loved the alpha back in the day, if you own the game on Steam now, the alpha is still playable if you right-click the game in your library, scroll down to the Betas tab, and select Alpha Release on the drop-down menu. Now, as far as I'm aware, this version appears to be the last release before the complete visual overhaul from the 13th of May 2013, as there wouldn't be another release for 5 months, 10 days. To which it returned with its brand new aesthetic, starting camp area, shops, post-game stats, and more. I could be wrong on which version this is, but to me it seems most likely to be this version right here, as this version mentions the angled walls showing up on maps, which definitely happens in gameplay. I contacted the creator and developer, Cuddigan, about this on Twitter, and he responded by saying, "I believe that the alpha version of the game was built by going back to the source code right before the new art was added in. We use version control, which means that for the most part, we can roll back the game to any point in time, which is pretty helpful for doing things like that." As far as the story goes, there isn't much of one. You are looking for an artifact called the Ythidian Orb, and your goal is to bring it back up to the surface. You are a dungeoneer, and you are diving and fighting through 8 randomly generated floors, with one final floor that is the same every run. In the alpha, there were only 6 generated floors, with the final one being the same every run, much like the full release, making 7 altogether. The further you go down, the more monsters you will fight, and they will get tougher each time. Speaking of the fact you are a dungeoneer, Joshua Skelton informs me that the original project was actually called Dungeoneer before it was renamed to Delver. The game is still referred to as Dungeoneer in the code. In the full release, an introduction level was created where you acquire the orb and then instantly get ambushed by enemies from all directions and barely make it out alive. From this point onwards, you seem to take the role of this character, that is the only one who makes it out each time, according to one of the NPCs in the camp area. It is my assumption that you take on the role of the character seen in the cover art and store page art. You begin each run in said camp area, and it's set at night with vendors and characters to interact with. And yes, before you ask, you can pet the dog. Joshua Skelton has even informed me that this dog in particular is created as a way to immortalize his dog Samson, who sadly passed away during the development of the game. So every time you make your way through the camp, show him some love, maybe give him a nice juicy steak too. As for the campers themselves, 2 of them are vendors. One sells you weapons and potions, while the other sells scrolls. There's also an old man who asks you to try and find some old lost structures, which I assume is referencing the Lost City. And the guy playing what I assume is a lute stays silent. Something seems a little off about them in general, and accessing the secret behind the waterfall pushes this feeling further. A note lies inside that reveals the true intentions of someone, and whether or not it's one of the campers, I'm yet to find out. It's very cryptic. Heading into the dungeon, the floors are broken down into pairs of sets, or zones if you will. The first 2 consist of the main dungeon itself, where you fight bandits, mercenaries, zombies, slimes, and the odd bat here and there. Past this is a resting area of sorts called the Well. In here, you can purchase items and upgrades, catch a breather, and find secret loot guarded by a horde of spiders. Past this are a pair of floors that make up the caves, where various insects and spiders are added to the enemy pool, and the layouts begin to get more complex. In the second layer of the caves, you are able to find a gate to a place called the Lost City, but the area itself is yet to be implemented into the game. Not a lot of information is known about this place, how it will be accessed, or even if it will be added. Currently there is a strange painting you can interact with on the same floor that seems to spawn ghosts around the area, but still nothing is known about what it should do. Following this, you will find yourself in the sewers, where you'll encounter goblins. These floors become a lot less maze-like and natural and more structured and man-made. This means that a lot of paths have sharp corners and fewer slopes. There is an area following this called the Breach. Yeah, not that one. This one is a lava-filled place where you can purchase scrolls, and is a nice slowing of pace before your final dive through the scorching underworld below. The Ruins. Ancient rooms inhabited by the undead that are filled with large amounts of lava and traps follow this. There's a lot of hazards, but less enemies in general. Finally, there is Yethidia, a small floor with a boss guarding the orb. Once he is defeated, you grab the orb and make a mad dash back the way you came, and climb your way up to the surface. The difficulty increases once again, and things get very intense. Any previously killed enemies have been resurrected, and every floor has floating skulls, a mage, and a mini-boss at the end. Luckily, any rooms you have mapped out on the way down stay that way so you can dart straight for the ladder. Once you reach the surface, you will find that the area has collapsed and that the campers have disappeared. A floating ball of energy appears, and if you talk to it, the run will end. When it comes to the gameplay itself, it has its roots in classic fantasy FPS games such as Hexen, Heretic, and even Daggerfall to a certain extent. From the perfect blend of two-dimensional pixel art sprites in a 3D space, the weapons, and even the way strafing worked back in the alpha. However, it's also clear that this game has adopted newer game traditions such as gaining experience through kills that allows you to level up one of 6 attributes, presented in what appears to be a random set of 3 at a time, all of which start at a base level of 4. Upgrading the attack skill increases both the damage of melee weapons and bows, defense increases the character's armor class, health increases your maximum health, magic increases the number of charges a wand can hold and the amount of damage they do, speed increases speed, obviously, and finally, agility increases attack speed and movement speed when charging a weapon. When you begin each journey, you start off with an iron dagger, a random potion, a random magic wand, and a consumable. Throughout the dungeon you will find all kinds of weapons, armor, ammunition, food, drink, potions, and bombs. Weapons come in all shapes and sizes to suit different playstyles, and they can even come enchanted with random effects that can increase damage, speed when holding them, and more, including negative effects. There's even some unique weapons to be found in the depths below. Speaking of arcane items, there are 4 kinds of wands in the game. There's the fire wands that fire an explosive projectile that arcs, ice wands that do less damage but fire multiple projectiles at once that slow enemies, missile wands that shoot simple damaging magic projectiles, and storm wands that take a while to charge but fire a very fast moving lightning bolt that pierces enemies. Alongside wands are scrolls, which come in offensive, defensive, and utility. There's even a scroll that reveals the floor layout, which is probably the most useful one of them all. Bombs can also be found around the dungeon and come in 4 varieties: standard, arrow, fire, and primed. Standard bombs are self-explanatory, they explode and do a regular amount of damage. Arrow bombs fire arrows in all directions upon detonation, fire bombs ignite the area, and primed bombs are dropped from broken pots and will detonate unless you pick them up fast enough, although you might not want to do that, as I believe their fuse will continue from the point you pick them up at, which I learned the hard way. There's also technically a 5th kind of bomb, but it's not an item. There's purple pots lying around, and attacking them will detonate them, dealing damage to everyone in the area. As we know, the game is a roguelike. This means that each run and many aspects of the game are random, but each run shares a common goal. The thing that is quite interesting about this is that even the potion system is random. There are 7 potion effects and colours in the game: blue, red, green, purple, dark, bright, and gold. Now, each potion colour does stay consistent with its own effect, but only in each individual run. They start off as unknown potions, and drinking them reveals their properties for that single run. So you see, if you start a run and drink a green potion and identify it as a health potion, all green potions moving forward in that run will be health potions. Next run, however, it could be paralysis or poison. Potions can also be used as bombs if they receive damage on the floor and will disperse a cloud that inflicts the potion's effect in a small area. You will also come across many different junk items, and many kinds of gems and piles of gold that increase your wealth. You will often find these items randomly scattered in rooms and pots, crates dropped from dead bodies, and in secret areas. The money can be spent not only in the well and the breach, but also on the surface. You see, you retain any gold found throughout each run. This means if you had a good run that yielded lots of gold, you can begin the next run with even better items. One of these items is called a strange elixir, which actually allows you to purchase a skill point prior to entering the dungeon itself. All of this combined together makes for a fast, fluid, satisfying and beautiful game. Everything from the sounds, lighting, animations, visual effects, and the overall feel really reminds me of the classic games of old, but evolved and polished up so finely. Which does remind me, there's also a bunch of video filters to alter the game's aesthetic. I'm personally not a massive fan of filters in games, but I always welcome their inclusion as there is certainly an audience that appreciates them. And on top of that, any customizability and ways to tweak the game to how you enjoy it is a massive bonus in my opinion. But what if even with all that, you wanted more? Delver has had the ever-popular Steam Workshop integrated into it. Mods can add all sorts to the game, ranging from graphical additions, new weapons, new areas, textures, and so much more. Hell, there's even the famous Sphax texture pack. Yes, that one. Well, only for the older versions, it's no longer supported. But there's one that I absolutely adore. Remember the alpha I spoke about earlier? Well, if you love the aesthetic of that version of the game, but also love the overall brand new content added to the game, then look no further than the Delver Classic mod. It brings the best of both worlds together. I wouldn't say this is the best way to play the game, but it's nostalgic as hell. Of course, there's also the silly side of things too. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Making mods for this game is also fairly simple. There's guides everywhere, and the game's engine itself has been made open source by the developers, so you can play around with it to your heart's content. Not many games get this treatment, so it's nice to see. And finally, as previously mentioned, if you're like me and have fond memories of the game's alpha state, you can just play that if you own the game on Steam regardless. The alpha holds a very strong nostalgic place in my heart, as I've already said, and that will never change. I love and adore how the game has evolved. The memories I have of its old state will never go away, and luckily they don't have to. We still have the option to revisit it at any time. In a way, the ability to do this reminds me a lot like Minecraft Java Edition. That also allows you to go back and play the very first versions if that's what you truly prefer. Minecraft is also linked to Delver to me, as that's around the time I was getting into Minecraft on Xbox 360. Back then, the console versions were quite behind the PC versions, and played like the PC's beta versions. So of course, I just get a massive wave of nostalgia every time I think about the games I played back in 2012 to 2013. My life was changing. I moved up onto high school at the time, and now I'm a university student studying games design and programming. Just like Delver, my life has changed drastically since then, and sometimes it's nice to go back and revisit simpler times. They're not necessarily better times than now, just very different, unrefined, immature almost. As I began production on this video, I decided that I would seek out the creators themselves and ask them for more information about the game. So I actually got to talk to them, both Chad and Joshua. I had an interview with both, and I even got to contact Tobias Arnold, the man behind the soundtrack that you've been listening to throughout this video. I'm only going to show parts of the interviews, but you'll be able to find the full interviews in the description and in the cards above. Here's a few clips from the interview with Chad Cuddigan.
Yeah, Delver started, I think, maybe in 2012, maybe a little bit earlier. It seems like a long time now. I've been playing CRPGs, computer role-playing games, for the longest time. Like, I grew up playing action RPGs like Diablo and all of the Elder Scrolls games, all of those first-person RPGs. Like, the first time I was over at my cousin's house, and he showed me this game like Daggerfall, where you could go anywhere in the world, and you go in every single door and live your own fantasy life, basically. It just blew my mind open. That's amazing. So I've always had the idea, but in the back of my head, oh yeah, I want to make a game like that, or like Ultima Underworld, all of these cool dungeon crawlers that I grew up playing. And I'd started dabbling around in game development. I got the original Android phone that came out at the time. I think I got a Droid 1 with the cool slide out keyboard.
Oh wow!
I was playing this thing, and I was like, hey, this thing can do 3D graphics, and there's no games for this yet. This could be a cool platform to make something. So I made a little arcade Geometry Wars style game called Tilt Arena, where you would tilt to drive your little spaceship around, and you'd always be shooting this arena battler. And after that came out, I was like, okay, I can do this. So then the next thing I wanted to do was I'll make a dungeon crawler. That should be simple. And then that ended up taking 5 years or more. So maybe not the best idea if I want to do something quick and easy.
Recently, I don't know if you know about the Daggerfall Unity project. I've tried that out as well. That's really cool.
Interkarma's project, right?
I no idea about the development team or anything.
Yeah, I overlapped with those guys a little bit back when I was in university, because I was working on tools to read in the Daggerfall dungeon layouts and display them on screen.
Oh wow!
And so there was a community of people back then, even in the 2010s, working on reviving Daggerfall. Wouldn't it be cool if we could run Daggerfall in an open source engine? Yeah. And nothing really came out of it at that time, since everybody was young and had no idea how to work with each other or in a big project. But it was a cool scene, and I think working in that made me realize I can't do a game as big as something like that. I need to do something a little more focused.
Yeah.
Which is kind of where Delver fell out, was how about I just make a game where you're just going through a dungeon? What if it's just a game like Rogue? Rogue was the first roguelike game. You're just there. You don't pick your character class. It's pretty streamlined. You're in a dungeon, you fight some monsters, you get to the bottom, try to get this orb. It seemed doable to take that game design, that roguelike style of game, and just make it 3D, and maybe get that type of game to an audience of people that maybe wouldn't have played an ASCII text character-based roguelike. So I was playing also a lot of games, a lot of NetHack and that style of ASCII roguelike. And I really liked those games for being super deep and complex, and all of the weird things that would come out of the systems in a systems-driven game like that. But it takes a really hard time to be able to look at that game and go oh yeah, I'm going to play this game that's 40 by 40 characters, and not play something with my $200 graphics card that I just bought.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try to bridge that gap there, and bring my love of roguelikes to people that maybe would never play them.
Okay.
And now, at the time, nobody was really doing anything like that. like the first looter shooters were starting to come out, but nobody was like doing first-person roguelikes. And then they kind of like blew up somewhere along the way, where now roguelike is, people hear roguelike, they're like, oh, another roguelike. It's an interesting kind of history about how Delver started that way. Like I said, like it started out as a game for Android phones because there were no Android dungeon crawlers really back then. Yeah. And I wanted to play one, so I thought like, oh, well, if I want to play one, I bet other people also want to do that. And I think this thing can pump out OpenGL graphics fast enough to do like a pretty simple dungeon crawler, but still something you could like sit down and play through. I think it eventually ballooned to the point where maybe it was not easily playable in that platform anymore. There was a point where we had to make the decision, like, do we keep making this game as a mobile game, or do we bite the bullet and then go, okay, maybe it's actually more of a PC game at this point than it is an Android game.
I'm guessing that's why development shifted focus to PC overall.
Yeah, I think it kind of happened in a weird way. Like Steam Greenlight was the way for indie developers to get on Steam back then. Besides like knowing people in the industry or like somehow winning the game lottery and getting on Steam some other way. But Greenlight came out, and somebody that was playing, or I don't know the actual story behind this, but somebody who'd been, I guess, playing the game.
Oh yeah, Josh.
I don't know
said
on
about
which
this.
platform. Yeah, but like somebody uploaded Delver to Steam Greenlight, and we didn't do it. So we were like, oh crap, like, is somebody trying to take our game from us? So we like we talked to Valve and like got that one taken down, but in the process we're like, maybe we should put our own up then, like clearly somebody wants this. There was like actual votes behind that initial one to the point where it seemed like, oh, people do want a game like this. So we put up our own Steam Greenlight page, and we ended up getting greenlit in one of those first initial batches there, I think. And that was like the start of Delver being a Steam game and not just like a little mobile hobby project.
When you did, like, obviously the alpha is very, very different to the final game, not necessarily entirely in mechanics, like, because obviously the alpha still very much feels like Delver. However, obviously the style changed completely, drastically overhauled. When was it decided that you'd actually take that step and completely change the look of Delver?
Yeah, that was actually a scary step. I think like there was a thread about the game's development on TigSource that was where a lot of the community feedback was coming from, where I'd be uploading new builds for people and people would be playing them and giving feedback. And it just happened to be like the way I was shipping that game was just a Java jar file, which is essentially just a zip file with the game assets inside of it.
Yeah,
so people started opening it up
and on the Delver wiki. I don't know.
What's that?
You can still download them on the Delver wiki. Some of them actually are still accessible. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I have seen those around there. I think I downloaded one once just so like I would keep an older build around just for my own personal vault, as you will. And so people were opening that up and like modifying the game, and the graphics were super simple at the time. They were like I think a player character or a monster character was maybe 16 pixels tall at the most. So people started messing around in there and asking for, is there a way that the game could just dynamically scale everything based on the texture size? And I was like, oh yeah, I think I could do that. So I added support for that in, and people started making these little texture packs, which were pretty easy to put together. There were only a handful of monsters and not a ton of animations, so it's not like they had to go through and like make 30 different animations for an attack. It was basically like frame 1 and frame 2, so people could get in there pretty easily and and make their own art for it. And a couple people put out art packs, and I guess it was showing the limits of my programmer art and how much better it could look if I worked with an actual artist and wasn't just doing everything on my own. And Joshua ended up being one of those people that made a texture pack. But the interesting thing about it was a lot of the other people that were making these texture packs were going for a totally like grim dark style, like sometimes very detailed. And the feeling that Delver had even at that time was not that. It was a little less serious even at the beginning. And so it kind of fit. He had these cool sprites that reminded me of characters from like River City Ransom from the NES. Yeah. Which is a game I played a ton of. And something about it just clicked with me. And I knew that like, oh, this seems like the way forward for Delver if we were ever going to take that step.
I mean, it looks amazing. I mean, as much as I love the alpha, the new art is just it just looks really, really, really good.
Yeah, it's pretty night and day. The build that took the game from the art that I had to the art that Joshua had was such a huge step at the time. Yeah. Like, I remember I'd coded this feature where I could press keys to go back and forth from the old art to the new art, so I could take before and after screenshots, and I would just run around the world going like, this is what it looks like now, and now it looks like this, and it was immediately a better game for it. Everything looks so much more I don't want to say detailed, more alive, I think.
Yeah. What would you say that your favorite part of the game was to work on for Delver? Or not necessarily maybe part, but maybe even just period of time that you worked on the game?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of notable times. I think the first one was when I was working on just the movement and the basic like getting collision to work in and getting the player movement to feel right. Like, that was all super fun. Just, there's something about a game when it feels good to play, and it was good to try to replicate that myself. I spent ages just running around tweaking the values of like the acceleration and the slowdown and how fast can you move when you're falling through the air if you press a key to try to change directions, and you're in the water now, how much should the water slow you down? And like, if you toss an item, how far should that go? How fast should it go? Like that early time when it was just like the basic building blocks of the game was really fun to work on. Like adding the first monsters in the game and getting them to chase the player around, and to be smart enough to chase the player, but also to be simple enough where I could toss like 1,000 monsters in the map if I wanted to and not have the game slow down. Like that was all super fun. But it's always more fun when you're going from nothing to something than it is going from something to something plus a tiny step. Like once you have the building blocks in place, everything from that point on is like just adding coats of paint on top, and it takes a lot longer for those coats of paint to add up to anything substantial. It's also fascinating to go back to an earlier version of something. Like a lot of game development feels like you have a big, like you're making a sculpture or something. You have a big block of stone and you're chipping away at it to see what game is inside of it. And it also feels a little bit like as you're making a game, you're always making decisions about which direction to bring the game in, and sometimes you're making your best educated guess about what is the best thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's fun to go back and look at a game that's maybe a lot less polished, a lot more janky, but also has a lot more open possibility space, and go like, oh man, wouldn't have been cool if they'd gone in this other direction instead, and as you work on a game, and the closer you get to finishing a game, the more you're killing the idea of it in a way, because all of those other cool things that you thought that would be fun to do, you kind of put those ideas to bed and tell yourself like, oh, maybe I'll get back to those someday in a different game. So it's kind of like bittersweet at the end of making a game, because you know there's so many more cool things that you could have done with it if the game would have gone in that way, or if you would have had more time, or like 1,000 other ifs. Yeah. But you go back to an earlier version, and yeah, it's just less polished and has more room for you to kind of fill in the gaps for yourself. It's like why reading a novel is still fun. Yeah. It's leaving a lot more for your imagination than like watching a movie, I think. There's still a lot of things that I wish I could have added into Delver. Especially just the like more secrets, more hidden content in the game, side areas that you don't have to go into, that you could go into if you wanted to kind of push your luck a little bit. I don't know if I will be the one to add that into the game or not.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's the push and pull between, like, there's a bunch of cool stuff we could do with this game, but also like being able to walk away from a project at a certain point, I think is really good for your mental health.
Yes.
And to give you room to kind of noodle on something new. I was definitely burnt out on the Delver project at the end. Like, when that final update came out, we really pushed to hit it. And at that point, like, it took a while to get back to the space of wanting to work on another game like that in my spare time. Delver was always made in our spare time while we had other full-time jobs, so it was basically eating up any nights and weekends that we could give to it, that we could steal from spending it with friends and family instead. So it was nice to be able to like sit down and read a book after that. But yeah, that said, like, I do get the urge now and then to go back and add new things to it, and a lot of that has been now spent like open sourcing the Delver game engine, so more people can go look at it and see how it was built, and even mess with the code themselves if they wanted to. Like, I feel like the best thing I can do for the longevity of Delver and making sure that people can continue to play it is to make the software behind it open source. Like, otherwise like games just atrophy and die unless the community can make it work on their own.
The full interviews with both Chad and Joshua are between 50 minutes and an hour long, so I've cut them down, as you can tell, and as I said before. Another reason why I've done this is because sometimes some of the questions mention the same things, and I don't want to be retreading any ground, so anyway, here's some of the clips from the interview with Joshua.
Hi, I'm Joshua Skelton. I am one half of Priority Interrupt. We are the game studio that makes the game Delver. I am primarily the art person, but being a two-person studio, we wear a lot of hats. So I do level design, I do businessy admin stuff on the back end. Like, more or less, nothing gets done unless we both chip in and kind of make it happen. Yeah, so we are a two-person company, and we run this on the side. So this is not our primary business. This is something that we do for fun. It started off as a fun project. It became a job, and I love it. It's been an amazing experience. Building a game that we believe in and that we love, and having a community kind of grow up around it has been a very rewarding experience.
So, what kind of games would you say influenced Delver's development the most?
Well, I mean, the big one, the really big one is Ultima Underworld. Like, I guess slightly telling on myself, I've never played Ultima Underworld. But I have watched Let's Plays of Ultima Underworld, and watching through that, I'm like, wow, there is a lot of Ultima in Delver's bones. Even with my additions, there's still a lot of Ultima Underworld in there. But personally, for myself, I channel a lot of the formative RPGs that I grew up on. So for me, that would be Daggerfall was a really big one that I just sunk loads of hours into.
I've played that a lot. There's even a Unity recreation that uses the original code. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, I've not given Daggerfall Unity a spin yet, but it looks amazing. But yeah, so Daggerfall, I love games like Doom and Heretic. Those were my bread and butter. I love, like, if you notice, the enemy art style is based off of River City Ransom and Lightly. Mostly because I just really loved how expressive all the little guys were when you're beating them up, and I wanted that same expressivity for our bad guys. And I didn't want I wanted it to be lighthearted, which I think was a good move for me, because this was something I have been staring at for years now, and it's nice. It's light. I don't mind showing my grandma my game, and now that I'm a father, I don't mind having my two boys sit here in my chair with me while I play. It's nice. But yeah, it just because, like, with the Doom and the Heretic and Hexen, that could have been like a way more dark and gritty, but I think the light and fun aspects of, like, River City Ransom, and even things like like the Zelda and like the kind of that 16-bit era really is in my blood. My visual, like, guidelines for Delver, I always thought of, if you could render textured polygons with a Super Nintendo, what would that look like? And that's kind of what my guiding vision for Delver was.
Okay, yeah. So I'm guessing that you also run the Twitter page, right?
Yeah. Yep, that's me. For better or for worse. I'm not super great at social, but somebody needs to do it. Otherwise, it wasn't happening.
Yeah, and you put a lot of effort on showcasing what the community is doing around the game as well, and it's really nice to see when developers do that. It really sort of crosses the two, developers and the players together.
Of course, yeah. No, I started off as a Delver modder, and I love, like, that is super. I don't know, it's so exciting when I see a mod that I have to take a moment and think, like, how did they do that? I know one of our modders in our community Discord recently, maybe in the past month or so, posted they had a very rudimentary portal gun working in Delver.
Oh wow!
With basic Delver assets. I'm like, you have a portal gun? And yeah, they had it working, and they had a little video of it working. I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, that's amazing. So, and there's also, like, just people who make really beautiful music or really amazing art, or there's just so much creativity in our community that is a constant reward. And I figure, why not highlight it? Like, that is, it's an amazing thing. These people put a lot of themselves and love into it, and let's just celebrate it with them.
Yeah, going to, like, the engine side of things, what is it written? Is it Java?
Yes, it is a custom Java engine written on top of libgdx, which is a framework on top of LWJGL, which is the same thing that Minecraft uses for the Java version. I believe, you have to confirm with chat on this one, but I believe it started off as a let's learn Java sort of project. For no other reason than just to learn the language, and it kind of spiraled out of control from there. But we still work on Delver Engine even today. It's an open source project in our community Discord.
Yeah,
we have a development channel. Yeah, and we talk about features, and yeah.
How did you come to, like, make that decision to make it open source? Because I know a lot of developers don't do that kind of thing. And how far can people take it?
Well, it's super embarrassing, right? It's like airing out all your dirty laundry, because like maybe people know this, maybe people don't know this, but to ship a thing is to really start chopping off the bits and pieces that you just don't really need.
Right.
And it's really hard to identify what those are. Like in your mind, you have a vision. You may have a doc that it lays out like what it's going to do. But like for us, we shipped Delver on February 1st, 2018, and 4 days later, my second child was born. So that was a very hard deadline for us. Yeah, because I knew that once I had 2 kiddos, like my free time was going to be just non-existent.
Yeah.
And I mean, now that they're older, I've got a little bit back, which is why I'm pushing more like Delver development, or at least Delver engine development, and it was for us, like open source is very important, and like mod scenes are very important. That's how both of us got our start. We hope that people can learn from our mistakes. It was really interesting. I got into like a small Twitter thread combo the other day with some folks in the retro FPS scene, and I was just pointing out like our implementation of decals, because a lot of engines don't have that. I'm surprised Unity doesn't have a baked-in decal solution. And I was just saying like, here's ours, reference ours. This is the article where we got our implementation from, reference that, right? Like, there's still value, even if you don't want to like use our engine. There is like, you could look at how we've structured things, and we are more than happy to talk about the decisions we made, why we did things the way we did.
Okay.
We just believe in sharing and knowledge.
Yeah. So like, how far can people take that? Like, is it just for modding, or can people make their own like entire games out of it?
With the open source engine, you can use it for anything, commercial or otherwise. You're not allowed to use the Delver assets, but the open source engine doesn't have those.
Yeah, of course.
So you can take a copy of the open source engine or clone it, and you can release a full game that you could charge whatever you want for it.
Kind of like a modern Doom engine, and how Heretic and games like Strife use that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. We are licensed under the zlib license, so we are an open source OSI approved license. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for people to take. For a while there, we were like a source available, not really OSI approved, but to make things easy, we just switched over to that.
I'm guessing a lot of people were probably going to ask about pretty much what every dev gets asked nowadays.
Switch?
Yes. Do you think that's ever possible?
I would super love to see Delver on the Switch. Again, being a Java engine, there are some challenges there.
Yeah.
We have done some investigations into it, and we think it's not totally impossible, but there are challenges we would have to address before we could consider doing a Switch port.
Yeah.
But yeah, if those investigations turn out to be like, hey, like it's going to be this amount of work, and we think we can do it, then yeah, we'll go for it. But we don't really fully know yet.
Yeah, because I know for a lot of indie devs that question is just sort of a headache for them because everybody they think it's just as simple as putting money towards it, when in reality, obviously, it's completely different architecture. Like,
I mean, it's an entirely different architecture, and there's just different sorts of like on Steam, there are really no platform requirements, right? You can just throw up whatever you want, but Nintendo has a big certification process, and there are a bunch of
licensing.
Well, there's licensing, but also there's just things you have to do, right? There are different considerations. Like, for example, you have to on your loading screens, I believe you have to have some sort of motion to indicate that it's not frozen, right? All these things, these crazy. There's just lots and lots of these little things you have to do, or if you can't do them, you have to make a strong case why you can't. And this is our first project. We're not going to really start leaning on that just yet. We want to play ball. We want to try to get a good set ourselves up so that we could pass cert if we were to get that far.
Okay. In terms of the main PC version itself, do you think there's any future content updates? Specifically in one area, there's the big gate that can't be opened.
Yeah, the big gate that can't be opened. That was a Joshua, let's make a cool piece of a set piece art to slap somewhere to add mystery to the area. and it happened to be a door. And at the time, I didn't even think that people would try to open it or expect something to be on the other side.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if you open up that level in the editor, it's actually in the top corner of like a very large empty map. Because I thought, oh, I'd have plenty of time to maybe make a little secret area or something, and that just never panned out. And over the years, like I've threatened to delete the door. Would I like to do something with it? Sure. I was considering doing a content update this year. Like with life right now, like it's tough. Like the pandemic has been pretty tough on a lot of folks, right? Like I am not unique in the fact that working from home, I have 2 small kids, so my wife and I are just balancing our lives on a day-to-day basis.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, no, I would love to do more content for Delver. I don't know if it's going to happen this year. It might. I don't know. And also, part of me needs to be like, well, it's in a good spot. Like we've always even throughout early access, we've always tried to leave after each update Delver in a good spot in a total like playable loop, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I would love to keep adding stuff to it, but
you have other ideas.
Well, I do have other ideas, but also like there's like a business like angle to it too, right? Like is the time I'm putting into a Delver update actually like giving a return?
Yeah, of course.
Is even like does it make sense, right?
Yeah. It's
So unfortunately, like when it becomes a job, you have to consider those things because I would love to do more projects and I would love to grow the company and make cool things, but again, this is a side project thing, so there's only so much time we put into it.
Speaking of like other things you're involved with, something called Rec Room, I noticed.
Yeah, Rec Room is my job. That is what I do. 40 hours a week. Rec Room is cool. I've been there a couple years, 3 if you count my freelance time with them. It is.
Because I don't really know what it is specifically.
Yeah, it's kind
I've
of
had a
an
look.
odd bird.
So I've kind of gotten like an idea, but should I explain it a bit further?
Sure. Yeah, so Rec Room started off life as like a VR social app. But nowadays we are no longer VR only. We are cross-platform, so we are all the consoles on iOS, still on headsets, still in VR. That's still important to Rec Room. Yeah. But yeah, it's a like a social making space, kind of like Roblox in some ways. In some ways, not. We have a ton of user-generated content, which again is part of the appeal for that job as well. Is like just coming into work every morning and just seeing the crazy stuff that people make in game is really wild. So yeah, so for Rec Room, for like my first couple years at the company, I was an artist. I transitioned from being a software engineer at Microsoft to doing freelance art. I did freelance art for a few folks, and then I ended up doing freelance art for Rec Room. And I liked working with the company. I really spoiled where I'm at. But I talked to my art director, and I was like, "So how about full-time employment? That would be nice. My family would like that because here in the States, like a lot of our like healthcare and other benefits are tied to our employment status. So that was that would be like a huge safety or just like a anxiety off of our family's back, because freelance is tough, and when you have children and a mortgage, like it's very tough.
Yeah.
But like I got a full-time position as 3D artist there, and it was a blast. I got to just really like push myself and challenge myself. But I found myself starting to write a little bit of code here and there, and eventually it came with an opportunity that what if I was the engineer for the art team? And that's where I'm at right now. I'm making tools and other kinds of cool like process pipeline improvements for the art team, and I love it. I still get to work with the creative artists people, and I get to make things to make their lives better, and it's a blast every day.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I am blessed to be where I'm at.
Obviously, when I gave you the document last night, which I really appreciate you going through and giving a few comments on it,
Sure.
The one about your dog really struck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that like the only personal sort of influence in that sort of regard?
Yeah, I think that's the most personal one. So the dog in question is in the opening campsite. There is a dog by the campfire, and that is my dog Samson. And he passed away during development. And I guess part of like my mourning process was putting him in the game. And yeah, he just a silent dog. So he was a silent dog in real life. And he you can pet him, and he wags his tail, and that's it. But I guess that for me the real touching thing is whenever I play with my kids, my oldest is old enough to remember him, but my youngest is not. But they all want to go pet Samson before we go into the dungeon,
Aww.
which I think is charming. And it struck me the other day is my oldest began to talk to him. He said, "Hey Samson, today it snowed. You would have liked it." And I took a moment and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't expect him to do that. So that is a nice thing about game dev is you can put little bits of yourself in there.
Yeah.
So for me that is kind of like a part of him that I do have.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's like I'm an art person, so like that's kind of how I process my grief in some ways. In other projects, I've hidden small Easter eggs, here and there, but nothing is really ever, nothing as big as Delver.
Okay. The interview with Tobias Arnold, the composer of the game's music, was taken over email, and I've taken the liberty of grabbing all the text from the email and shifting it to my script to clean it up a bit and make it a bit more readable, as Gmail just doesn't have very good formatting at all. So basically I approached Tobias over email asking a few questions about the process of making the music for the game and the inspirations behind it. So it started with me sending him all the questions alongside whether he'd want to do it over Discord or video or text or whatever, and he replied by saying, "It was a fun project, although with a slightly bitter end for me. I'd prefer to answer your questions in text form as the project lies quite a few years in the past and I may need some time to recall a thing or two. Thanks for your kind approach and greetings from Germany. I saw Delver as a super basic prototype on YouTube. Being a fan of roguelikes, pixel art and first-person perspective, I was instantly hooked. I noticed the lack of music and I thought I could help to give it some more atmosphere. At that time, I didn't think it would become a commercial product, so I thought my hobbyist skills were sufficient." I followed this up by asking what his initial goal with the music was and what kind of feelings he was trying to evoke. And he stated that, "I started with a simple theme that should convey a sense of light-hearted adventure and exploration. As later levels had a darker tone of skeletons and lava, I then created some eerie dark ambient noise and merged it with the adventure theme so that it became quite a twisted version of it. Special zones like the cave and sewers got their own themes. Going back through the sewers towards the surface while being hunted by the undead became a series of more action-packed chase songs." I then asked him what his biggest inspirations were, and he said, "Honestly, I had none in mind. I simply created music as I perceived the game's visuals and theme." I was curious as to how Cuddigan and Skelton approached him for the music, or if it was the other way around, and he stated, "I approached Chad after seeing the early footage on YouTube and offered to create a soundtrack for it. He later told me that he had talked to another musician as well, but I was more passionate about the project and didn't ask for lots of money. So, I got into the project. At that time, I still thought it would become a free game, hobby project and such, so I would work for free. Only when I learned it grew to a commercial project, we agreed on a fair piece of the cake." Being a fan of learning about content in games, I was curious to ask him whether there were any tracks that didn't make it into the game or were done entirely, and he said that I was surprisingly quick and efficient. As the game itself was a great inspiration, Chad also gave me full creative freedom on the topic. He was a cool guy. The only thing we did change was the guitar in the theme song / splash screen music. I worked completely with virtual instruments, and the guitar I made with propeller head reasons sounded a bit cheap. Chad knew a talented musician who could record a real guitar version of my chords. It sounded great. I am proud of the theme to this day. I composed it and mixed it in just 2 days, just in time before the game got shown to the public at some show. I thought the game needed music to leave a great first impression when you open it, a track that sets the mood. I was especially nervous to get that right. I was curious to see if he worked on anything else, and I asked him if there are any other projects he had worked on, and he said that I always made just music for myself, to have fun, and with the goal to get better at it. I was quite obsessed to create studio quality sound and to do every part of the process myself. From recording and arranging to mixing and mastering, Delver is the only commercial project I have worked on so far. On one hand, I'd absolutely love to do more, but unfortunately I suffered a burnout and fell into a severe depression in the middle of the project. From one day to another, I was literally unable to make music anymore. I'm still both sad and ashamed about this. I left Chad hanging in the air and he had to find somebody to continue my work. I'm grateful for the time we had, and so sorry I had to abandon the project. These days, still suffering from recurring depression, I feel too insecure to try another commercial project. Unless someone would really want it without time pressure or any warranty. To expand on this further, I asked him if there is any future projects that he'd like to talk about, or anything he's got planned. And he said that I am struggling to become active and productive again when it comes to music production. Experiments I make reassure me that I am still capable of it, and I even got better after having some distance. But motivation and energy is hard to find when you are depressed, and my biggest problem is to find stories to tell with my music. When I find my way back to it, I want to put some tracks to places like Bandcamp and see where it goes from there, but I gave up on the idea to make music my career. He touched a little bit more on why it was a bitter ending to the project, saying that, in the end, I did the only thing I thought would be fair and useful to Chad. I gave him the project files for my songs, and all rights for them. We unfortunately didn't stay in contact, and the project remains both as the most exciting thing I did so far with my music, as well as the most painful memory within the hobby. I still get the occasional visitor on playback on SoundCloud, which makes me proud of the soundtrack. At the same time, I never got much attention for my ambient music, which I find a bit sad. Thank you for letting me tell the story behind that work. Let me know if you have any questions. Best regards, Tobias Arnold. Tobias and I sent a few more emails back and forth talking about his future in his career, and was kind enough to send me 2 unreleased tracks that he composed after his work on Delver for other projects. He gave me permission to play my favourite parts of each track, so here they are. When I was talking to him, I felt really bad for him, seeing that he never really got the recognition that I think he deserved for what he has created over the years. He genuinely has created some fantastic pieces of music both in the Delver project and outside of it, so links to his SoundCloud will be in the description. He also said that I can include his email in the description of the video too, if anyone wants to contact him for whatever reason. So, where can you currently acquire the game? Well, currently you can buy it directly from the website, which you can find a link to in the description, for $14.99 US dollars that is, and you'll get access to DRM free builds of the game and a Steam key. Speaking of which, you can also purchase it from Steam for the same price. You can also buy a version on the Google Play Store for mobile devices for just $1.99. However, this version has not received an update since 2013 and is currently on version 0.86b compared to the PC version, which is at version 1.07, which dropped on February 10th, 2021, so bear that in mind. On the Delver Wiki, a lot of the versions published during the free alpha can still be downloaded and played for free, so you can give those versions a try if you'd like, but remember that those versions are unfinished, and the most stable, polished version of the alpha is currently only accessible if you own the game on Steam, and possibly directly through the website. I also want to say a huge thank you to the developers and the musician for lending me some time to talk to them. Go follow them on Twitter, which I will leave links to below. Whilst you're at it, go give the Delver and Priority Interrupt Twitter accounts a follow too. They post about updates and community content, which is highly appreciated and always great to see when developers take note and support their fan base. Hey, if you made it this far, well, wow, it's a very long video. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who watched the video all the way through. This is my first attempt at a video with a commentary on this channel, and my first attempt at a scripted video that I've actually put a lot of effort into. I started working on this on the 26th of February, and I wanted it to be as good as I had the resources to make it. I am hoping to put out more content like this in the future, with my usual content in between them. I also live stream on Twitch from time to time, so links to that, my Twitter, and my Discord can be found below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Any constructive criticism is welcomed, as I want to improve and evolve my content the best way I possibly can. If you really liked the video, why not subscribe? Thank you.